we are now at the point that we did introductions that we're going to do my part of the workshop. And so what I have decided to do is to actually share my story. I do want to preface my story as being a sponsor that I'm coming to it from a standpoint where I'm not necessarily going to be talking about my journey. I'm not going to talk about what got me into CoDA per se and what I did with the steps and all that. So you might not learn that much from me on that side. I wanted to frame it specifically my journey becoming a sponsor and what it's been like sponsoring multiple women. So, after the meeting or something, you'd be like, hey, well, what was your personal journey? We can talk about that later. Awesome. And we're supposed to be recording it, but I didn't press record and I see that it's recording still. So I think that we're good, right, Wendy? Because I know you do the tech stuff. We're good on the record part, right?
Yes, you guys are good at saying record at the top.
Perfect. So here we go. Thank you for listening. Okay. Before I came into CODA, I've always been told that I have a teaching quality within me. When I came into CODA, I had a hesitation of diving too deep into service work and becoming a sponsor due to my past experiences after people recognize that I have a teacher quality in me and what transposed later, which was taking that quality and giving too much. And because I was not in a codependent recovering process, having no understanding of boundaries. After I would be in, say, volunteer work or some sort of club I liked, or even doing something at work that was outside of my regular duties, people would mention my teacher quality, and then they would automatically thrust upon me all these things to do, all these tasks to do. They would especially love to have me try and fix messes that were there way before I even joined the organization, the group, or work. Because I was not in recovery and I didn't know I was codependent. I then was in the situation where I was putting off eating meals doing this sort of volunteer work. I was not resting and putting this work first. I would try and squeeze these things they want me to do between actually doing what I was paid to do to earn a living, to take care of my own life. I was fixating in my head for hours on end the things I needed to do for these people because they would tell me, you're such a great teacher. You're such a great leader. Look at you. Okay. So I guess I have to really live up to that, I guess. And then I would start feeling guilty about something I've yet to do on top of all of this putting off eating, putting off resting, squeezing things in. Because on top of that, whenever people in these organizations would send me an email, a text message, I would have that codependent need to answer it right away. And all of that made me really hesitant to start diving into doing service work and becoming a sponsor in CODA because all of that I knew I had a tendency to spiral back into. And I didn't come into recovery to repeat that behavior. On top of that, I came from a family that when I started learning about recovery, started reading the materials, learning about things such as external and internal boundaries, which I will explain after I complete this part of the story. My mom told me families do not have any boundaries. And that's what white people do. Black people and Black family do not have any boundaries. That's silly. And I want to explain to you that this wasn't something old. I literally brought that topic to my mom about 2 years ago. So 2022. So that's the mindset of where I came from. And it probably all trickled down to why I was having those codependent spirals with the volunteer work and the other organizations due to being set up in that way. So let me go back and talk a little bit about the external and internal boundaries I mentioned. And the language that I have, an external boundary is basically how you are relating to another person physically when you are talking to them. It can be an example of how close are you when you're talking to someone. A good range is 6 feet usually. Do you feel your external boundary is being pushed because someone's more than 6 feet and they're still talking to you? Do you feel you're too far away because someone's maybe 10 feet away from you trying to talk to you? It could be, are we allowed to hug, hold hands, pat on the back? How close are we when we are in a group? Compared to the internal boundary is more about what's going on inside of us. It's, I am responsible for how I create myself. I cannot blame the other person for what I've done over here. It's not blaming the other person based on the emotional response I get in my head, based on how I choose to give meaning to the information I'm receiving in our communication through my senses. This information that I'm getting through my touch, taste, hearing, etc., can often be skewed as a codependent. As I gave my example, I was raised and molded into a skewed relationship with people in my family of origin. With internal boundaries, I create what I think and feel, and I am in control with what I do or don't do. I will go a little bit more into that through the rest of my story. And I hope the setup of internal and external boundaries will help you understand me better. Also, there's some great material out there in CoDA that discusses it. However, I have not gone through all of the CoDA material personally, so I can suggest it, but can't give specific references to the material I haven't read yet. So, given my tendency, my history, and family of origin, I was hesitant to become a sponsor at first. I took my time learning the step work myself, and I took experiences in my personal life as my life was changing and as I was changing inside of the CoDA program, and I became a more healed version of myself. It took me a while to find a sponsor after I started to get into the rhythm of being in the program, a year to be exact. I had an expectation of specific qualities my sponsor should have, the way she should look like, the things she should say, her personality, our spiritual connection, things of that nature. However, I eventually eradicated all of those, what I consider to be roadblocks and preconceived boundaries of constriction in a negative way. And I ended up a year later with a sponsor who was completely different than the small cage I was putting myself in. And yet she was exactly what I needed at that time. And still years later, when I talk to her, when we have the chance to check in, she just is an amazing support for me. After I finished my 12 steps with my sponsor, which I believe I didn't keep count, so my guesstimate is around a year, maybe about 11 months, my sponsor asked me to immediately start sponsoring other women. At the time, I didn't feel ready to do that. And I probably also had some of that emotional memory of what I shared with you stuck in me, and I declined. Time passed, and unfortunately, I did not check the time. So I would say probably a few years, maybe 2 years afterwards, going to the online meetings during the COVID and post COVID, I connected to a lady in a different state, and she asked me to be her sponsor. And finally, I felt it was time. And I started my process of becoming a sponsor for the very first time to my very first female sponsee. From there, we worked our way through and completed the 12 steps. We are still in touch today, but talk less frequently as she has spread her wings and she still is active with her own religious spiritual connections. She's still on a process of gaining educational and work skills, and she is still expanding her social community. She also, as we're doing a sponsor workshop, did not end up sponsoring someone herself yet. We will see if she will ever turn into a sponsor herself. After that part of my first sponsorship experience ended, I have had quite a lot of women in these CoDA Zoom meetings reach out to me, asking me to become their sponsor. As we went through the dance of trying to see if we were good fits, their levels of commitment, and if we would actually come together as a sponsor and sponsee relationship, most of these ladies that reached out to me never made it to actually getting the blue book, getting to reading the intro, getting to read step 1 in the blue book, or get to reading all of step 1 in the blue book and then get to the green book to start reading the first page and answering all the questions. However, currently, I am sponsoring a wonderful and dedicated woman who we have gone through the process of seeing if we're a good fit, getting both the materials. She's read up to where we are in our current steps. We've actually gone through a few steps in the Green Book, and we are progressing towards doing all 12 together, and have even made plans to hopefully do some more connecting and education after we start out with the 12 steps. Through all these experiences of potentials and the 2 people I have actually either completed or am currently completing with, I have gained so much knowledge that I wouldn't have ever gained through this CoDA program if I never put myself out there and actually tried to be a sponsor to other women. This service work has helped me to practice the internal and external boundaries that I explained to you earlier. It has stretched me with those boundaries to internally manage this balance of helping my sponsees and potentials and the codependent urges or knee-jerk reactions to be oversharing my personal experiences when these sponsees are reaching out to me, or trying to control them in my head that I think is good. I wouldn't be able to learn how to manage that and redirect it and be a more interdependent person if I didn't face those urges and those temptations head on. This balance I'm talking about is an internal struggle, and it's a shadow side of my codependent nature. I'm thinking as a sponsor, I want these women who are my sponsees to be their best and to do the best. And that in certain situations that they're sharing with me, that I might know better than them. If a woman maybe is sharing their desire to act in an unhealthy way around a man as my sponsee, and in spite of us having a moment to have me share either from viewing that, from being in the rooms and seeing the result of someone else in that situation, my own mistakes I've made, or just picking up and being social and seeing that elsewhere, that idea of how the sponsee wants to engage with a man will not end up good and will probably hurt them, and they will probably end up on an emotional scale lower than where they are with me today, and they still want to move forward with that behavior. My codependent shadow self has been activated. I then struggle with a immediate urge to want to, through the phone, shake them and say, don't do this. It's going to hurt you. The man's going to break your heart. The man's going to break your soul. Don't. And then, as a sponsor, as someone that's had years of experience, I have to internally take a step back. This person's not my child. This person's an adult. Often this person's older than me. And if that person, after they have been warned, after they've been cleared that something is off here, still wants to go on, as a healed codependent, it's my job to allow them as a sponsee to make that mistake, to move forward. But because we have committed for this type of relationship, if they come back and want to discuss, want to be supported, I can then give that support. And not in a I told you so, but let's regroup, let's heal, and hopefully never do that again. And if I never sponsored, I would never be triggered like that. I would never have those experiences where I had to put to the test steps 1, 2, and 3, all the other steps to get to that stage to allow them to be their own independent person. As my sponsees have gone through the 12 steps and the 12 questions, I feel like every time we're working on it together, even though I don't actively re-answer those questions, that I'm doing it myself in a new way. It feels like I'm renewing my own internal step work by hearing their questions, me responding to their questions internally and thinking, is that something I want to add to how I relate to this step? Maybe this is something that I originally wrote that I want to retract from my thoughts on this step. And maybe they are putting in new thoughts for me to help my own personal practice grow. When the sponsees share their journeys of how life changes when you do the work and the projects, because it does, you will have amazing changes as you do the steps, but then hard things come that make you want to stop or put you in fear. And as the sponsees are so raw sharing that with me, it allows me to feel highs when they're going through their highs and to feel so elated to see people blossoming into their own woman. It allows me to feel resonance to when their situations mirror my situations, and to see each other working through it together on this journey feels so sacred. When they are struggling through those hard moments that I mentioned, I get to be compassionate and learn to be the mother that I never had. And having that pure mother energy that's not controlling or directing, but of sympathy and nurture and a safe space for them to emotionally release gives me a better way to be a better person. And none of that would allow me to be a better person that is solidifying these concepts of CoDA, the 12 steps, this healthier mindset, and the day-to-day practices to continue this if I didn't choose to be a sponsor. And I do feel that after you complete your 12 steps, and after I completed my 12 steps, some assimilation is needed in order to be a successful sponsor. And that me taking time afterwards was great. I do feel that the initial hesitation or fear after time has passed to move into a sponsorship position is a limiting thought and belief. That once I allowed myself to release the old family issues, the old volunteering and codependent downward spiral I shared earlier. It gave me something so much more in my life, and it allowed me to become a more elevated person and relating to other people because I gave myself that gift of being of service to others. And I thank you guys for letting me share.